Hello and welcome to a new episode of the STEM Confidence Podcast. In this episode, I want to share with you my experience of writing my PhD thesis. At the time you will be listening to this episode, I will already have submitted my thesis, which is, of course, great news. But today I want to talk about the process itself and some of the things that I found useful so you can also apply it in your thesis writing process. So, the first thing that I did is to start with a plan. I know that you probably heard of it, but designing a writing plan and knowing exactly what you are supposed to do each and every single writing session is really a game changer. I did one just before I started writing my thesis, and it included absolutely all the details of my dissertation, including the formatting specifications. And I included the formatting specifications because I didn't want to be there at 2 a.m. before my submission deadline worrying about formatting the whole thing. So I really recommend doing it beforehand and then just filling in the content. So the golden rule for this part would be format first, content later. And I used this same philosophy when it comes to my writing plan. So first, I decided how many chapters I want my thesis to have. In my case, I decided to split my work into 6 chapters since my thesis consisted of 2 major projects. Therefore, I decided to split it in 2 parts, each belonging to one of the 2 major projects. The way I see it here is that you really have 2 options. One is to do it the traditional way, the typical introduction, methods, results, discussion, and conclusions, or do something like I did, which is to split the thesis into 2 parts or 3 parts with a shared introduction and conclusion. This is, of course, up to you, but whatever you choose, I think it is important to decide it beforehand so that once you start doing the heavy lifting, or heavy writing in this case, you already have everything prepared and ready in your head. Once I chose the chapters and gave them the appropriate titles, I went deeper into deciding what goes into each chapter. For instance, in the chapter I was describing the methods of the project, I decided on the titles of the sections and also subsections and wrote them into my writing plan. Doing so, in my opinion, really helped me because once I came to the writing part, I had a very specific task in mind. For example, I could put in my calendar the following task: write section 3 entitled Data Filtering in chapter 2. Doing this made my life a lot easier once I actually reached the writing stage. So after I decided on the chapters, sections, and subsections titles, I put all the figures that go to the corresponding chapters. If you have some figures already made or designed from your papers and seminars, you can just copy-paste them in there, but if not, you can just put a placeholder with a figure description. I believe this would also work quite well. So by now, I already had the entire backbone of my dissertation, which included the chapters, the sections in each chapter, and the figures. I used this writing plan sort of as a cheat sheet to which I would always go back and refer to when designing and deciding on my writing sessions. So before starting the writing, I did one more thing, which is formatting my entire thesis. As I said before, I didn't want to deal with any formatting issues at 2 a.m. before submission, so I decided to do it as one of the first tasks. Alright, now that I had the backbone, I went to the writing process itself. Since I was always a very visual person, I like when I read papers that by only looking at the figures and reading their captions, you can already get most of the science done. I wanted my thesis to be that way, so I started writing by designing the figures and writing their corresponding captions. I found this was the longest part of the writing process, since once I had the figures and captions, writing the main text, at least for me, was quite straightforward. After the figures and the corresponding captions, I decided on my writing schedule. I believe this is super important and it keeps you on track. Usually, what I was doing is setting to write at least 3 sections per day. Of course, this is how I planned it, but there were days in which I could write only 2 or even 1 sections. No matter how bad a day was, I didn't let 2 days in a row go by without hitting the 3 sections goal. So, for example, there were days in which I was able to complete only 1 of the 3 planned sections. So the next day, I would just move on to the next 3 sections that I planned for that day. I would never go back to the ones that I missed the day before. I would just mark those as unwritten sections with a red marker and go back to them on days in which I had more energy. Another thing that I did, and I found it really useful, is that I would make sure not to accumulate these unwritten and ignored sections, and by the end of the week, I would write them up. This way, I could start every week without the feeling that I'm falling behind. In my case, this wasn't very hard because I allowed a pretty flexible schedule that I knew I would achieve. So if you are now in the beginning of your writing process, I totally recommend you find a way to fit your writing into your lifestyle. This is actually the best way to stick to the plan. For example, I knew that I function much better in the mornings than in the afternoons. So I made sure to get all of the writing or most of it done by lunchtime. So to summarize, whatever you do, plan ahead first. It will be a huge lifesaver once you are there in the mud trying to figure out your writing. Having a writing cheat sheet will give you structure, which all of us PhDs crave since everything is so unpredictable. So having a little bit of structure works really well. Also, your writing schedule will give you a really clear schedule of writing so you avoid procrastination and actually make sure that you are on track with your deadlines. Alright, so this was how my thesis writing process was. I found it quite enjoyable, to be honest, and in case you have any questions, you can contact me via Instagram or even leave a comment below. I will be very happy to help. Thank you for listening, and until next time. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you are ready to elevate your communication skills and transform your data into valuable insights, schedule a free discovery call on the link in the description.